this stuff exists in the United States. It's prevalent in the United States. People value it in the United States. But in Canada, there's a little bit of that lag, I would say, in terms of development, which is understandable. But to see what you have done with this platform and to create kind of the next evolution of education about Canadian football, to me, has been really inspiring. So why have you dove into this platform, and what is it about what you are doing that you believe so strongly in? Because I love watching what you guys produce, because I genuinely believe that it's unique, it's creative content, but it's also educational. And that's such a great, I would say, kind of like Venn diagram of different parts of football society that you have smashed together and just in a short time period kind of mastered, honestly.
Hey, well, I appreciate the kind words, and what kind of got me into it. And we were talking about this before, but you know, there's so many really good Canadian coaches. Like my first thought was, and obviously being a huge fan of Canadian football, whether it's the CFL or the U Sport, where I was fortunate enough to play and coach for 8 years. I just got to know firsthand how many great Canadian coaches there were out there, and I would often, being the son of a coach, I got to see a coach, go through part of his development, and trying to always learn more and always be trying to learn more, and steal things that could help his players and help his program. And I just felt that there was so much knowledge out there about the Canadian game that the average football player doesn't know, right? Like most Canadian football players probably know more about the American game because they play Madden, right, than they
Yeah.
do about the Canadian game. And then those players ultimately become coaches, right? So then those same gaps are there when people start their coaching career. So like when I started my coaching career, and I was super fortunate. I played 1 year for Coach Jeffries at Laurier as a freshman, and then Coach Faulds came in my second year. And because of injuries, I ended up not being able to continue my career. But I knew I wanted to coach, so I basically emailed Coach over Christmas and said, "Hey, like I don't think this concussion stuff's going to resolve itself anytime soon, but I would love to come help coach because I saw what he was building, right?"
Yeah.
And I really believed in. And Coach Damon was my positional coach, Irv Damon, who's now with U of T. And I just thought, what an opportunity I can learn from Coach Damon. He's one of the smartest people I've ever been around in the offensive line world. And Coach Faulds is one of the best leaders and brightest offensive minds in Canadian football. And I just remember being a young coach and wanting to learn stuff, and then having to really rely just on the connections that you make through coaching. And I was super fortunate to learn from a ton of great coaches, Ron Van Moorkirk, Mark Soria, and then other people just throughout the OUA. And you just have to watch so much film to try and start guessing at what other people are doing. Whereas in the States, it's like, hey, like this is what Lincoln Riley's doing at Oklahoma. This is how they run mesh versus, Ohio State, or versus this air raid, team or whatever. And I would just see all these pieces of American content, and often I would try and steal it and translate it in the Canadian game for myself, selfishly. And then you see those things in the CFL as well too, because you have, whether it's an American quarterback or an American offensive coordinator that's bringing stuff into the game, or on the defense side of the ball as well. And so it just, for me, like there was just so much great Canadian coaching out there. Part of it is I just wanted to bring that to people, right? Like I had been around these coaches, whether they're at Laurier or across the OUA or across the country. I'd gotten to meet them through, connections, and them authentically just giving up their time to help me out. So I just wanted to just kind of share that with people. And I think the more the more enjoyable the Canadian game is, because it is a different game and it's a unique game. And I personally believe, from a coaching standpoint, it's a great coaching opportunity for people to learn, but also just for, like, if you're a fan of Canadian football and you're looking to, better understand the game. I just felt like, a great opportunity for myself to learn, and I'm sitting on all these calls, and I always tell people, like, people are always, "Oh, thanks for doing this. Thanks for putting this together." And I'm like, I've learned more than probably anybody, because I get to ask you questions, after we stop recording too, right? So, that was kind of the idea behind it. Is there's so many great Canadian coaches coaching in this country and coaching our game. And it's not just our channel, like Virtual Football Clinic does a ton of great stuff. Coach Sharbs and, All 22 and Three Phases. There's other groups doing it. And I think a lot of us got into it at the start of the pandemic because, there's nothing to coach, right? So we might as well learn. And so I think, hopefully we're able to keep going, and these other guys are able to keep going. And for the next generation of coaches, when hey, and it might be you take over your 8-year-old son's flag football team and you're looking for some route concepts, or, you take over your kid's going from JV or abandonment to JV, and they need a linebackers coach, and maybe you played a little bit of university football or high school football and you want to volunteer your time, but you're feeling like, hey, it's probably been a while since I've been in the game. I just feel like it'd be a valuable thing to have out there, and I've learned a ton doing it myself. So that was kind of where the idea came from.
Yeah, and I love all of that, honestly, Jackson, because when I see what you guys have produced, and I've watched it closely, I've checked in on a bunch of stuff because my frustration, honestly, as a member of the media when I was working in radio was that I love breaking down Canadian football. I write about it for CFL.ca. I love covering it. I track all the throws in the CFL. We're looking to do more things for the OUA and track throws and talk about percentages and average depth of target and all these, and kind of parse these things, and that'll help our analysis of the CFL draft. And there's so much that goes into this of giving smarter analysis, and you guys have done so much of that. But I honestly, there's times where I feel like a fraud because I'm covering these things or I'm breaking down the CFL and I'm talking about offensive style for Jamie Elizondo and the fact he's getting paired with Trevor Harris. And I watch it and I have a sense for it. I know the statistics behind it. I know the depth of target. I know the accuracy rates. I know how Trevor Harris plays. I know what he likes as a receivers, but I don't know the system. So I love that you guys dive into U Sports, CFL, whatever, the system that's actually behind the numbers, because a lot of people will just look at the statistics, and whether you're looking at advanced metrics or you're looking at base stats, what you're really looking at is, well, how productive are they? And it's like, well, there's a lot more that goes into that story of how productive are they than just the numbers of how many passing yards they had per game or how many passing yards they had on the year or whatever it might be that people look at and try to find value in. So the idea of being able to say, okay, here's the explanation, the background, and the honest truth on how that production came to be. I love that so much because people want to know more than just what I put out there, what Derek Taylor puts out there, what other people put out there in terms of here's what you should value. It's like, well, all of that has context. And what you guys are really doing, honestly, to me, is adding context to all of those conversations.
Yeah, it's been really fun. Like, and again, like I've been a CFL fan my whole life. My birthday happens to fall on Labor Day weekend, so I
Nice.
grew up going to Ticats Argos, and it was funny because like the fall was a pretty busy time in my house. Both my parents are teachers, and my dad was coaching high school football at John F. Ross in Guelph. And so I wasn't necessarily a fan of like a CFL team. I grew up in Guelph, so I cheered probably more for like Argos Ticats just like locally, but I just was such a fan of the game, and I remember watching the game and going like you see like in the Canadian game, there's so much variety. And I think that that's one of the cool things that's coming up more now is, when I was coming through in high school, it was a lot of spread, right? For good reason. Like, Damon Allen, Calvillo, guys were chucking the ball all over the place, and it still is. And I think people have this tendency to think that like the CFL, and this is an uneducated opinion, I'm not supporting this, is that the CFL is like kind of a watered down version of the NFL. Right. And I'm like, you're totally wrong. There are concepts that come out of American college, concepts that come out of the NFL, because it's the same game, right? If you have two receivers running a route concept against man coverage, right? Like a buddy of mine was like, yeah, like I might as well just watch the NFL because it's just what's happening in the CFL at a higher level. And I'm like, well, in some ways, right? There's great talented players in both leagues. You know what I mean? But the Canadian game itself is so unique. And I think that for us to continue to develop fans of the CFL, you have to know what you're watching, right? Like I can turn on the soccer that's going on right now and I enjoy it for like the competitive atmosphere. And, I understand the level of greatness that goes into it, but I don't know anything about soccer. So it's hard for me to be an impassioned soccer fan when, all I know is the teams that are supposed to be good. You know what I mean? Like that's the level of the context. So, I think whether it's coaches who are trying to learn, and one of the things that I really enjoy is we're just trying to put out content about where football is today because it changes all the time. One of the most interesting things to me is in the next year when we get to watch our first piece of CFL tape, like I want to see what it looks like, because I really followed the NCAA last year because that was the league that was obviously the NFL was on as well. But I just had more access to NCAA stuff in terms of like film. And, I want to see which concepts like, hey, like the Argos are running this concept, that Alabama had success with or whatever. And being able to understand how those things play into the Canadian game, the American game's influence on the Canadian game, but also understanding the challenges that are created by the Canadian game that the American game, frankly, just doesn't see. So I think for coaches getting into it, I think there's there's an opportunity to just have a little more Canadian context. So if you're looking to kind of expedite your development and say, hey, I want to help coach my son or daughter's team, in 3 months, what can I do now to get myself ready? Or if you've been coaching for a long time and you're trying to learn, hey, I want more up-to-date stuff, but in the Canadian context, I think it'll help that, group of people. And the other one's players, right? Like we get a lot of DMs from players that are like, this is really useful. Like I took this to my high school coach, or, we ran that play and I never really understood it. And now that I've, seen it, and like that stuff's just so rewarding. You know what I mean? Like we get, honestly, our views are probably more players, just because, the sheer numbers, there's more football players than football coaches. But I just think it'll help so many populations around Canadian football, whether it's fans who want to be more informed or, better understand what they're watching, coaches trying to develop, or players who are just trying to learn the game. Because there is that void, right? And the reason there's a void is simple. There's so much more money to be made in the States. It's just a bigger industry, right? Like that's not anyone's fault. But high school coach for my dad was something he did because he loved it. High school coach in Texas is something you do because it's extraordinarily lucrative. Yeah. Not to say that those guys don't love it too, or their jobs aren't hard, but I'm pretty sure, my dad's 10 District 10 titles in 30 years would have made him a little bit of money. And, and I think we have a great game. We have a unique game that absolutely is influenced by things that happen, in the NFL or in the NCAA. But there's also things, and I've had these conversations with American coaches where they go, hey, like, how do you handle motion? Like our defensive structure could never deal with that, right? Or how do you change, when you get a change of strength, right? Like so much of the American stuff is based on, passing strength. Well, in Canada, you could watch a Ticats game and they start in 32, motion to 23, and finish in 41. How do you handle that, right? And I think when you understand the unique challenges that the Canadian game puts out, it's honestly hard not to enjoy it. Like it is a much more strategically challenging game to play. Yeah. And it's no knock on the American game. The American game's a great game too. I'm certainly a huge fan. My Michigan Wolverines break my heart every year. It's an incredible live sport, and I'm just looking forward to when we get a chance to see it back on this side of the border.
Yeah, absolutely. And both sides of the border, everybody's looking forward to being able to have kind of the full normal version of full fans in the stands and all the rest. But how has this changed you as a coach? Because you mentioned earlier, Jackson, that you've had the opportunity not only to absorb all of this because you're on the actual Zoom calls where you're talking to all these coaches about different concepts and systems, but you also get the chance to talk to them afterwards. And the average person might pop in on 3-down development and they see, a 3-man route concept piece that's a half hour long, and they absorb it and they take it in. But you're getting everything. You're getting zone drops. You're getting, zone blitz concepts in one video. You're getting, a deep drop concept on defense. In the other, you're getting a spread concept. The other, you're getting, H-backs, and another. There's so much stuff, so much variety that you guys are offering up. You've absorbed it all, but also when you finish, and as we all know, for anybody who's been on these Zoom calls throughout the pandemic, you end up clicking stop recording, and then you hang out for a couple of minutes and you go, hey, that was good. That was interesting. I was really taken aback by what you said about thing A or thing B. And I would imagine that would have a profound effect on you because of the people that you are getting the opportunity to speak to week over week.
Yeah, it's been incredible, honestly. And thanks to everyone, that's come on and done this and been incredibly open with what they do, right? A lot of, we've had a lot of great, whether it's high school coaches, all the way through CFL coaches. And a number of these coaches are, this is their job, right? Like when Tommy Condell comes on and installs how they run their stick concept, like they're going to run that 80 times next CFL season, right? And I know people think there's more secrets in the world than there really is, and it's ultimately about players and execution than knowing each other's scheme. But we've had people come on and really give meaningful things. I think when you go to a coach's clinic, you take away one of two things. Either that guy didn't really tell me everything I need to know to run that, or wow, that was a really honest speaker. And I think the people that are coaching the game at a high level understand that it's more about how you teach and execution than it is about, we break at this depth instead of that depth. So thanks to all the people that have done that and come on and made the content, because it's a lot easier for me to just sit back. And a lot of these coaches come on and they have a presentation ready to go. And I tell them, I'm like, I'm just going to get out of the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just do your thing. And, for me, and I knew this going in, but seeing it from so many different people, there are so many great teachers that are coaching football in this country. And, we've had some great NCAA coaches on as well. And I'm just always really impressed by the difference that can make when you're delivering a concept. So, like, for example, like Tommy Condell did, who's the Ticats offensive coordinator. He did 3 great videos. He was on Zoom with us for like almost 4 hours.
Wow.
And
Tommy's crazy like that. Like I know Tommy pretty well from being around the Ticats, and like he is incredibly willing to just talk in general. Like I stopped him when he got hired as the Ticats coming back after he'd been in Toronto for a little while, man. Jackson, honestly, he was at an event. It might have even been when the Ticats announced they were going to end up hosting a Grey Cup the same time as they announced the double announcement with Regina. And I hung out with him for a couple of minutes, and he was just so willing to talk. And I was like, I don't understand. Like Tommy's so genuine about that stuff. Not to cut off your story, but he's one of those people that really exemplifies what you are accessing at this point, where it's like these people want to talk and they want to help Canadian football develop. So why wouldn't others access it? But you have accessed this market.
Yeah, he's incredible. Him and Alan Rudolph, who was his offensive line coach for a while in Hamilton and is now at the University of Ohio. They're both, and we've had I think we've done like 140 videos, and I can't shout out everyone who's done an amazing job, but those two coaches, like I'm a teacher by profession, you know what I mean? And to see, I think we all, when we were playing football, for the most part, it was, hey, here's the diagram, here's a video,
right,
here's the coaching points, and that's good. Like that's better than it was 20 years before that, right? When it was basically get it right, do it again. But you look at the way that they use things like PowerPoint or the way that they annotate videos. Like oftentimes I'm kind of modeling when we make our own videos off of what I see these other coaches do to really bring the concept to life. And I think one of the cool things about football right now is in the last 20 years has gone from like a very concrete game, like chess-like, to being 3-dimensional, right? Like RPOs is a word that's thrown around all the time. And, my buddy always jokes that I should have a YouTube channel just for correcting people when they call play action RPO or a pure run play. But that's for another day. But,
I've experienced that on the CFL and TSN too. Don't get me wrong. Like I've heard some people before be like, it's the run play action. I'm like, that's not a thing. That's not.
Yeah.
It's like at a very basic level, there's a misunderstanding about what this stuff is and where we're developing to.
And it develops so quickly, right? Like as soon as something works, it's modified and widely used in weeks, right? Because of the access of film. You don't have to wait to the end of the season to go, like call that other office and see if you can trade them some film. You can hop on your computer and you can have the film with the analytics in minutes. So the game changes really quickly. And I think that's just making it a better product, right? It's an arms race. And one of the things that I've focused on in the last year, just with my experience at Laurier, we started running RPOs probably like 2014, like kind of after the Eagles won the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of amazed by how few adjustments like defenses had to it, right? Because there's some fundamental challenges that you create, and then the defense is always going to try and create challenges for you coming back the other way. And I just felt like we got very similar looks for like 2 or 3 years. And it was one of the things as a coach myself, I'm like, I don't really have defensive answers other than just playing like man coverage, which, if you can do it, you can. And if you can't, you can't. To defending that stuff. Same thing with option routes, right? Like you're looking at the way the passing game works now. It's not like, when I was in high school and it's like, you're running this route and you're running this route. And, if not, we're going to do this. Almost everyone on the field on a number of plays has options based on depth and leverage, and quarterbacks are reading some of that pre-snap and post-snap. And it's just such a dynamic game. And it's so much more entertaining when you understand it. And as a coach, like it can be really intimidating because you can see something or be interested in something. But I think anyone who's coached knows, like, until you really understand it yourself, you're very hesitant to teach it.
Yeah.
Right. And I have, before I had this chance in the pandemic, there was a number of things defensively where I would see at times Like Robbie Smith just did a great clinic for us on different ways to defend zone. It was on defensive fronts, but he also did another one on different ways they defend zone read or other run plays. And I was like, oh, like I saw that. That's amazing. Like I had kind of pieced together a part of that, but I had no idea it was related to this. And I just think, for the level of high quality teaching, I think has been the biggest thing that's affected me. It's making me go back, and as a head coach myself with the Cambridge Lions, saying, hey, like, how do we run meetings? How do we get, like I saw one coach talking the other day and saying, no cut up you have should be longer than you can't put it on TikTok, because that's what these guys are used to, right? So you want to have a minute 15 seconds, I think, is the max. It's like a tweet in a video. You want to have 3 clips, 1, 2, 3, no lead in time. Like, the film that I'm used to seeing is like, see the huddle, you see the huddle, you see the huddle, then it opens up, right? Like, cut all that stuff out. You need to, you need the big, it's almost like highlights. You know what I mean? You need the big circle around this, and the words got to be big and flashy. And it's not because, like, kids don't concentrate as well now. It's just like that would have worked better before. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to be more engaged by things that are more entertaining. That's not like a hard work thing. That's a human nature thing. So that would probably be the biggest takeaway for me is you get to this really high levels, the Tommy Condells, the Alan Rudolphs, some of the American coaches we've had on, the Canadian, whether it's U Sport, whatever, head coaches that are really doing a great job, or offense coordinators, defense coordinators, and just their system for teaching it is sound and reproducible, and you walk away going, wow, like the standard for doing a good job is really high. And I don't think enough people recognize that about Canadian football. And you playing for a grade with Coach Potasic, me playing for Coach Jeff and Mike Faulds, like we understand how the quality of coaching that goes on, even at the U Sport level, never mind the CFL level. And the quality of players, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I always appreciated the specificity that those guys had. And it's funny because I had a chance to work with Coach Jeff when he was the specials coordinator with us at MAC the year after he had left Laurier. So I had always heard Coach P talk about what was happening with Coach Jeffries at Laurier and how much he respected him, all the rest. And then he came over to us, and I'm like, this is different. Like I get a chance to see it hands on, which is great, which leads me into my last question for you here, Jackson, which is, and I know it's a tough one, but I saved the toughest for last because, that's what all good interviewers do. And then we bail on the interview, is that I end up looking at the names that I have watched you communicate with and the people that you've been able to sit down and have these conversations with that are super insightful. You've mentioned Condell, so I'm going to take him out of the equation, but just give me a shout out of some of the people that you have found really insightful here. That in terms of people that want to check out 3-down development, they want to go and learn something about the Canadian game. They want to understand concepts, or maybe they want to understand a small piece of the game itself because they're really focused in on one part of it because they're a high school coach who's been given the defensive line and they've never coached defensive line. They never played defensive line. They want to know one thing. It's just, let me know some of the people that you have really enjoyed interacting with throughout this process.
Yeah, that is a tough question. And like I said, I think we're at 130 some videos, and not all of them have had a guest. Some of them, have been our own little film study. But that's a good question. I mean, we did a series where we got positional coaches from the OUA and basically got questions from social media, our all access series, one of the ones we really started with. And all the coaches on that were really, really good. And so that would be one. If you're looking for like a series, I can't name them all because there's like 20 some coaches, but
right.
Like we did D-line, and we had Coach V from Laurier and Coach DA from Waterloo, and two totally different playing experiences, right? Like Ron played in the OUA and DA was playing in Villanova, and now they're both coaching down the street from each other here in Waterloo. And Coach Cannon as well. Anthony Cannon was on that, who played in the NFL, played in the CFL. That D-line one was amazing. Anything, man, that's a tough question because I want to nail it down.
Is there, what I actually want to ask you is there anybody that from the quarterback perspective that you found super enlightening? Because I think a lot of people will be interested in the quarterback aspect of the game and learning it and progressions and reading. And because even if you're just a fan, you might want to check that out and say, okay, I want to educate myself when I'm watching a CFL game or a U Sports game or a high school game on what they're actually trying to accomplish. Because if you don't play quarterback, it's tough to understand what quarterbacks are actually doing on a play-by-play basis? And I know that you've had people on who really understand the discipline.
Yeah, that's a good question. We did our all access for that one. We had Cole Meyer, who's the quarterbacks coach at UBC. Really, really good young coach. He's done a separate video with us as well. Will Finch, who people around the OUA needs no introduction. He's trained most of the top end quarterbacks in Ontario. And I got to work with him at Laurier for a year actually as well. And then Mike O'Connor was on that one, who's obviously still playing and one of the best Canadian quarterbacks in the world currently. So they were great. Ron Williams, who runs, if you're going to follow one social media account, this is how I stumbled on Ron's account, Sport Core Performance, and Ron has his own as well called QB Motion is his quarterback one. He's training like all the top American quarterbacks right now. He's a kinesiologist from British Columbia, and he's incredible. Like from a mechanics standpoint, I mean, I took kinesiology and he like talked me under the table. Like I was like,
hey man, I wanted to get into Canon. I can only imagine.
he was great teacher because he took it and he's like, okay, this is what you really need to know about quarterback mechanics. And again, like I didn't play quarterback, right? So I have no, going into that interview, I was, and I talked to I've helped out with some quarterbacks before, but that was super enlightening and great on the quarterback perspective. Just taking like the motions, like people are always like, oh, like this quarterback doesn't have that much arm strength, or this quarterback's throwing motion is not good. But a lot of people talk about it, but he is literally the master. Like globally, I would say right now, he's one of the best quarterback coaches in the world, and he's a Simon Fraser grad from British Columbia. So
nice.
This is great. In terms of other great coaches, we did an awesome. Robbie Smith, who's a player currently with the Argos, did an incredible one on D-line recently. Craig Rowe as well, who's also a D-line with the Argos. He runs an incredible Twitter page as well. If you're a D-line coach, at Craig Rowe is about as good as it gets. We've done, I think, the Condell stuff in terms of purely CFL. He broke down a lot of the way that he teaches quarterbacks to handle pressure and go through progressions. And I just stole it. Like I'm using that now. Like I'm using that terminology. I'm not going to try and make anything better than that. It's one of the most impressive things I've seen. We've had so many great people come on. Craig Butler, Ticats defensive backs coach, did a great episode on eye discipline as well about this time last year. And we revisited the topic as well recently too. So lots
good.
of good stuff on there. And I think it's easy now to share information, right? And I think that there's going to be a lot of players. One thing I hope from this is there's going to be a lot of players who missed out on football in the last 2 years. And there's going to be some people that are transitioning from playing to coaching, right? Or they're done playing at least, right? And this was almost me. I was a last minute ad, to Laurier's recruiting board my year that I got recruited. And, it was almost me. So I know what that feels like. And I just hope that, anyone who wants to get into coaching football, it's an intimidating game. There's 24 people on the field at once flying all over the place. And the rules are different than the American game. So if you didn't really grow up watching the CFL, you're probably not an expert on those things either. So I think it's an intimidating game to get into as a coach. And hopefully whether it's us or the other great, groups that are doing some of this stuff, and it has cropped up in the pandemic. There's 3 or 4 really good YouTube channels. Like I said, 3 Phases. I was actually doing it first, I think, before any of us, and then Virtual Football Clinic and all 24 as well. I just hope that more people get into coaching it because it's such a rewarding profession to be in or hobby to have if you're doing it at, a more local level. And, it makes a difference, right? And the better the coaches are, the better the game's going to be. The better the game is, the more it's going to grow, the more people will play, and the more people that will benefit from the things that ultimately, we've benefited from. I'm going to get off this call and have like 5 amazing interviews pop right into my head. So maybe I'll tweet those at you guys for when you set
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Again, the answer that I had in there, and please directly credit these 5 speakers. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel bad about any of the names that you've hit or missed in this because there's too many to name, which is why I knew it was an unfair question. But honestly, Jackson, you did a great job answering it because there's enough in that answer that you feel like is missing so many people to drag people towards your channel because there is so much there for people. So I give you great credit for what you've done, man. I think it was a niche that probably wasn't very much appreciated at the beginning of the pandemic. And then we all started to realize, okay, we're all sitting around, what are we going to do? And there's a lot of people out there, I'm sure, that were like, well, I should, do this or do that. And I've had ideas about things that I could do as well. But to actually execute it and to actually bring it to life and actually develop it and to put the work in, I think, is the most impressive thing, because that is tough, man. So congratulations on everything that you've done so far. I can't wait for people to get a hold of this. I hope it excites people who love Canadian football to go and check it out and get an opportunity to understand the stuff that you are putting out, because there's not a whole lot like it, despite the fact that there's other channels that are doing it. It's the idea of being able to, the high tide rises all boats kind of. I love that we're getting to that point in Canadian football where there's a little bit more media, there's a little bit more niche media, there's a little bit more development, there's a little bit more coaching discourse on Twitter, and that feels more American to me, and that's a good thing, because the American culture around football, we all want, I think, to raise that point. So thank you for doing your part, and thank you for hopping on here with me, because it's been a lot of fun to understand exactly what you guys are trying to create.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and kind of just echo the statement that you had there. It's a great game, and there's great people at the helm, and
Yeah.
I think that the more people that choose to turn over the rock of, hey, like, what is going on, in Canadian football? Should I be a CFL fan? Should I, should my son or daughter play football? It's a great game, and it teaches a lot of the same things I try and teach in my grade 4-5 classroom. In a medium that reaches a lot more people a lot easier than math class does, and that's what it did for me. And I think all the really good coaches know how much we owe back to the game, and we're just going to keep trying to do that. But we're on Tuesday nights. We do a live stream on YouTube. If you want to come check us out, usually we do it at 8:00 now, because we've had a lot of viewers from the West Coast. I might have to get creative with our timing, because we're too early for some and too late for others. So we're looking at moving the time around, but it's all posted afterwards anyway. So, if 8:00 Eastern happens to be after your bedtime or while you're eating dinner, based on where you are in the country, it all comes up on our channel afterwards. So really appreciate, you giving me a chance to talk about what we do. And, it'll be exciting to break down some new CFL film, from every angle, the media angle, the coaching angle, the fan angle, soon.
The people that live on the West Coast, listen, you're in Canada, you live by East Coast time. Okay. I'm sorry, but you guys need to get off work a little bit early. Okay. If you want to hit the 3 Down Development live streams on Tuesday night, ask the boss for a little bit of time off at 4 p.m. maybe, because as we've learned from the start time of all sports throughout the history of sports, Eastern time is supposed to run this thing, although it's probably not fair. And I would also say the greatest experience I've ever had, and I don't know if you've gone through this, Jackson, but when I visit Alberta, watching sports, having the sports done, and then watching the sun go down is the greatest experience in the history of sports viewing, because you can actually watch sports and have a life, which is something that I think a lot of us in Eastern time don't really understand.
It's an incredible, my parents are actually in Banff right now, and every time they come back home, I'm shocked. So, here's hoping that they choose to come back to Ontario again this time, because I think the West Coast is stealing something from the world that we're not. But absolutely. But yeah, check us out on Tuesday night, and thanks so much for having me.